I think on that note, and we can deal with the other things as we go, we want to get some stuff done, because I wanted to deal with the gut with you tonight. So on that note, I'm going to go straight into that. So this is what we're going to cover this evening, is this idea of how we can improve overall digestion, assimilation, utilization, and avoid the bloating, avoid the gas, all the stuff that goes with it. I think you both attended the Menopause masterclass that I did, or maybe watched it. So you know a lot of this already. But there's some interesting stuff here, considering our past and what we used to do and what we do now. And really, from a traditional point of view, I think if you consider that crops would be scythed by hand, bundled up, left in the fields until the horse and cart could come and pick them up. And what would happen is that they'd probably be exposed to dew and then sun and then dew and then sun, or maybe rain and then sun. And so what would happen is over a period of a day or two or three, the seed head would start to germinate from the humidity and the sun and all the rest. And it would actually make it more bioavailable. So it broke it down into a much more biodigestible form or format, which is very beneficial, okay? And then it would be taken to be milled. So it was already breaking down by the time it was milled. Okay, but you know what happens these days. You've got a combine harvester, lops it up, strips it, and sends it straight to the mill. So there's just no change. It's like it was still growing. And you know from your notes that I sent you on the macronutrient guidelines that grains, legumes, beans, nuts, and seeds all contain phytates, which are compounds that block essentially it's like a protection against bugs. So it's almost like a plastic casing that stops the bug being able to access the germ cell, the little cell that is the replicator. And so those phytates are what we then ingest if we don't soak and, pre-ferment that food. We then ingest that, and it can cause major disruption to the gut. So a lot of my clients, I think what they're experiencing these days is this disruption to the gut because they're eating very modern harvested foods. And actually, traditionally, we had some really, really great ways to deal with that. And that's what we're going to also talk about. So you're soaking, when you take it, like if I do white rice, for example, you want to soak it for a minimum of 7 hours. I stick it in warm water, squeeze half a lemon in, and I leave it. And then when after 7 hours, rinse it out, cook it, and then I know it's very soft on my system. And it's, it's easy enough to do that. Anyone and everyone can do that. And there are also a lot of anti-nutrients, by the way, in these foods that are just blocking compounds. They're very heavy on the gut. They're very heavy. So everything is dependent on the health of the digestive system. This is the thing that I don't think we appreciate enough. You take mouth in through the food in through the mouth, it leaves through the anus, and that whole pipeway, that whole pipeline, everything should be operating in perfect harmony in order for us to be in the best health we can be in. So things like, gut bacteria, for example, and that's why probiotics are so beneficial. It's why fermented foods are so beneficial, is because that influences not only weight and leanness, but also health. And so the first place I go to if a client says to me, for example, here, last summer, as we went into lockdown, there were a lot of winds around that time, and I used to, as a teenager, and when I was in the ballet company, I used to get conjunctivitis in Cape Town, where just my eyes would be so itchy, and I could rub them raw. And it started here a year ago, and I went, oh, okay, I need some really good probiotics. I bought some high quality probiotics, and I bombed them. I did like where it says 1 a day, I did 4 in one go. And then I would do another 2, maybe 2 hours later. And it totally sorted out my eye allergy. So often when there's a skin issue or allergy issues coming up, it's because the gut it's not, the flora and the fauna aren't there. And it's the first place to go to is putting beneficial bacteria in. And it sorts out a lot of issues, like the eczemas and the rashes and those sorts of things. Most of our bacteria obviously make up our microbiome, which is just a collection of pathogens in the human body. And most of them are housed in the gut, in the colon, but they are all over the place. And apparently, if you take the weight of that, I think the weight of the combined pathogens is heavier than we are ourselves as humans. We have so many living in us and on us. So it's quite an interesting. So we are a collection of parasitic and what's the term for the, living in harmony? There's the symbiotic relationships with pathogens. Yeah. So, okay. So yeah, basically we provide the living environment, the space and the food. They digest our food. They provide the nutrients that we need to keep growing, basically. So it's quite a nice little system. I've got a note here to tell you that according to a particular researcher in his study on gut bacteria, this was shown in the Journal of Gastroenterology and Hepatology, having a wide variety of these good bacteria in your gut can enhance your immune system function, improve symptoms of depression, help combat obesity. Actually, a friend of mine, Seher Azazi, is a nutritional therapist. She gave me a quote for this as well. She specializes in probiotics. So she said, we rely on our gut microbiome to keep us healthy. And like anything in nature, balance is key, the balance between harmful and beneficial bacteria in the body. Overgrowth of harmful bacteria can occur through stress, a poor diet, high sugar, medications, specifically antibiotics. This imbalance, also called dysbiosis, can lead to digestive issues, low immunity, skin issues like eczema and acne. So it's like first place you go to is gut health. Whenever you have any kind of health issue, go there. Yes, Elsner, you're going to say something.
Should one take probiotics extra?
I tend to, because my feeling is that we're exposed to, because I'm not perfect with my diet and I don't want to be, I will bring sugar in from time to time. I will bring in alcohol from time to time. I will bring in some processed food from time to time. So if you're doing that, then I would say yes. Or you just bring in a huge amount of fermented foods, and it's a cheaper way to do it. Okay, so you can do it either way. We'll talk about the fermented foods. And then you've got this thing called LPS. And they are, so endotoxins are the compounds that occur within the body, but they can cause inflammation. So if you are in good health, those LPS they should remain inside your gut wall. But certain foods can make the gut leaky, and then those LPS can pass through into the bloodstream, and that immediately sets off a reaction, because what it does is it gives the body an indication that there are now toxins in the bloodstream, which there shouldn't be. And so then you have a reaction to this. The industrial oils and refined carbs are probably the two most toxic, kind of, from a point of view of health, and the problems that they create are two of the worst for this endotoxemia. In other words, they're two of the worst kinds of foods that will cause inflammation, leaky gut, and then the passing of these LPS into the bloodstream, causing inflammation and all sorts of problems. So your allergens, any other inflammatory response. And it can happen just after just the one meal. So, when you choose to do your fish and chips, or calamari and chips, or whatever it is that you like to do it, but do it knowing that there are consequences to it, and then you can counter those consequences appropriately. Okay. So, sorry. Where was I? Okay. All right, so going on to the digestive process, just stop me, by the way, if you want to ask anything. This is quite an important one, because, again, I think we eat with very little awareness sometimes. We're trying to fill an empty, hole in our stomachs. But I would say that the process of chewing is possibly the most important aspect of good health, good digestive health. Because when you've got food in your mouth, you're releasing amylase, which starts to break down the starches. You're also chewing. So you're increasing the surface area of the food in the gut. And that's important, because when you when you swallow, firstly, you're holding the food here, so you're giving a signal to the nervous system that there's food coming. So the stomach then prepares by producing hydrochloric acid, and the pancreas produces enzymes, or the stomach produces enzymes. You've got a whole lot of stuff coming in, all these chemicals, natural chemicals. And so by the time you swallow that food, you've got sufficient amounts of hydrochloric acid to operate over that greater surface area of food. And that's really important because HCl kills pathogens like bacteria, fungi, parasites, any gremlin. That's its job. So if you only chew 3 times and swallow versus chewing 80 times and swallowing, let's say it's a piece of steak, your HCl has got a much less effective surface area to work on with the chewing 3 times and swallowing. So your chances of then absorbing an opportunistic pathogen are quite high, especially if you're not in great health, if you don't have the bacteria, that are operating for you and actually in very high numbers compared to your poor bacteria, the less beneficial bacteria. So you definitely want to produce enough HCl, and as we get older, we produce less. We produce less of everything as we get older. Okay, so you really, really, really want to be focusing on chewing well. Okay, and you can see the other thing it helps with is absorption of B12, which is very important as we get older, iron, calcium, and protein. So think about it from a point of view of being osteoporotic or we're having osteopenia. It basically means that the density of your bones is affected. Now, typically what a mainstream medical approach would likely be, take these calcium supplements. The problem is that taking calcium supplements isn't going to do anything if you can't absorb calcium. And you can only absorb calcium if you've got enough hydrochloric acid. And besides, you don't just make bones out of chalk. You have to have the protein and the calcium and the iron and the sodium and the hydration that all form together to create this density of your bone. So you have to build it up with a number of different nutrients, not just with calcium. So I would never recommend just taking a calcium supplement. I think you always want the whole food. You always want to make sure the gut's working properly, and that way you're less likely to have a problem with bone density. Okay. Other reasons for chewing well, yes, your gallbladder is responsible for releasing bile. Bile is responsible for emulsifying fat. In other words, helping your body digest and absorb fat. So you need that. You also will get satisfied earlier on in terms of your calorie absorption. So if you think about it, if you're working your way through an enormous meal and you get halfway because you're eating really, really slowly, your brain suddenly goes, oh, you know what, I'm full. Versus if you eat really fast and you get to the end and you've taken in an extra half a meal of calories because your brain wasn't yet ready to go, I'm full. Okay. So eating slowly has that added benefit. All right. Especially eating high-fat foods. And I can remember once sitting down having a little experiment with cracking nuts. I wish I could buy uncracked nuts. I don't know if they call them unshelled or shelled. Unshelled. Okay, they weren't shelled. They were in their shells. And I sat cracking each nut as I ate it. And I got to 10 nuts and I was full. But think about it, we buy a bag. And we can eat half a bag, or if not the whole bag, before we go, oh, I'm actually quite satisfied. There's so much fat in nuts. I mean, they're the most beautiful food. But at the same time, you've got to think about, there's a lot of energy in that food. So do you need all of it? But you also want to feel satisfied. So the slower you eat, the more likely you are to get to that point of going, oh yeah, I'm full and I don't need all of it. Okay, so I think mindfulness while we eat is very important. And also actually mindless eating or distracted eating has been associated with weight gain anyway, and overeating and anxiety. So for that reason alone, you want to sort of be in a very calm state. You want to be aware of what you're thinking about, because you can cause a stress state just in your brain. Your brain can't distinguish between something that's real, dreamt, or imagined. It will have the same response, the same chemical response to all three of those situations. So you need to think about what you're thinking about while you're eating. because, keeps you calm. Yes,
Sure.
Jenny. When you're in the middle of that
Yeah.
hectic day and you're thinking, I've just got to get it down, before I move on.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's terrible,
No,
terrible
I
habit.
mean, sure.
Huh?
Yeah, the hostel's taken years off my life.
Yeah.
3 more years to go.
I had, really, it's still long. I used to have inner city clients in the finance sector here, and we got to the point with some of them where we would just, they'd eat lunch at their desks, but we would swivel them and they'd put a beautiful picture of a tropical island or something calming on the wall, and they would sit and eat their lunch facing, and they'd swivel around and carry on working when they'd finished, just to try and stay calm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you want to stimulate remember your nervous system is comprised of two parts, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. The sympathetic is responsible for fight and flight. That's your anxiety side of the system, the stress side of the system. But the parasympathetic is responsible for rest and digestion. So when you're slow and you're calm and you are taking your time and you're relaxed, you're totally switched on in that parasympathetic system. So your chances of absorbing and utilizing and assimilating all the food you're consuming at that point are very high. But when you're stressed and you eat, you might as well not eat.
Yeah.
Okay. Because it's just too stressful for the body. And you don't absorb the stuff anyway, and actually just leads to weight gain. Yes, Elsner.
I've never mentioned it, but I've got a problem with eating.
Okay. Now's the time to mention.
I eat extremely quick. You won't believe how quick I eat. I will have an entire plate of food. I'll eat it in 5 minutes. And I can't slow down. And I've tried. I really tried.
But it's just a matter of learning how. What made you? Were you in a hostel?
No, not at all. With my work, I'm always in a hurry. I always rush. Everybody always tells me you must just slow down, but I don't know how. So and I was always standing eating.
Okay,
just to get it over and go back to my
no.
work.
So that's just not ideal. And given your goals, given the fact that you want to, sorry, I interrupted you there.
No. It's
okay. So given your goals in terms of leanness, you're not going to be adding to that. You're going to be detracting from your leanness by doing what you're doing, because it's a very high stress situation. So can you get into a situation where you time yourself? So you set yourself, if you currently literally take 5 minutes, set yourself a timer for 10. Okay, so the two rules are you have to, the first bite happens at the start and the last bite happens at the end of those 10 minutes. So you make it stretch. And the second thing is you have to sit. So
I do sit, but I rush while eating.
Okay, so don't. So set yourself a timer.
I don't chew. I really don't chew. I just slurp it in.
So no one else can change those habits but you. So you just need the motivation to do that. You need to make a decision about whether or not you want to change that. And then you need to put a plan into place to do that. So when you were sitting with family, ask them so put something on your table to remind you to set a timer. Okay, so when you come into the kitchen to eat, have something on the table where you look at it and you go, what's that? Oh, yeah. Okay, that's about timing. Or get family members to help you. So if you're eating your meals with family, ask them to help you, to remind you, and take your phone with you and set a timer for double the length you normally take. And then, as I say, literally the first bite happens as you set the timer, the last bite happens at the end. And you have to try and even it out from start to finish. Okay. And you definitely can change it. It's just about being motivated to. So that's the suggestion I have for that. And maybe you can test that this week and we can check up on you next week. Timer for meals. Okay. Yeah. Actually, you can get your son involved. Tell him he's in charge.
Yeah.
You'll love that.
He likes it.
You'll love that.
Yeah. Shame.
Okay. All right, good. Yeah, so I think it's a very poor habit. You definitely want to change that. And don't drink with your meals. Definitely not icy anything, but try not to drink with your meals at all, because you just, because that just messes with the concentration of enzymes, digestive enzymes. Okay, so once food is swallowed, just in terms of the journey, the stomach is going to grind it, masticate it essentially. Well, it's the teeth that masticate, and that's another reason you want these guys to do the work they're designed to do, is because you don't want the stomach to have to do that. You want to be gentle on the stomach. So grind it here, churn it in the stomach, breaks it down further, more enzymes come in, it's basically, it becomes a paste. Okay, and then the pancreas is going to dump a whole lot of stuff into it. The liver will release bile, and all of that is going to help process this into its smallest parts. So from the stomach, when it gets broken down into the small intestine, into its very, very basic parts, the liver then will take the liver processes it, and then very special cells will take the nutrients from that liver and deliver to the body. But what's left over in waste in terms of liquid goes to the bladder, kidneys, and what's solid goes to the large intestine, obviously for elimination. Okay, so yeah, your most basic form, of course, your proteins are amino acids, your carbohydrates are glucose, and your fats are fatty acids. All right, so the liver then is going to be storing or processing or delivering. That's its job. It's a big job. And then we've said you've got elimination happening from there. So it's just a real process down that pipeline. Okay. All right. Now, you know, because we've covered this previously, that women experience these gut issues as we get to the age where estrogen starts to diminish, because we've got so many receptors for estrogen, not only in the brain, but in the gut and in other areas, enormous numbers of these receptor sites around the body. And so digestive distress is a very, very common side effect. We also said that when estrogen drops, we produce less bile. And so your chances then are diminished in terms of lubricating, but also emulsifying fats. Okay. And less lubrication means there's less movement, of course. And this is one of the reasons fats work quite well in the diet to aid with constipation. It's just the lubrication in general. Okay, water and fats. Adding fermented foods, digestive enzymes, any other kind of support for the digestive process are highly recommended. I mean, we've spoken about fermented foods already. So you want to add more of those if you can. You could make your own. A digestive enzyme supplement is never a bad idea. Ox bile extract is one of those. We literally has taken the extract from the ox's bile, and so you're consuming a dried, a dehydrated version of that. You could do bitters, so just your basic Swedish bitters from Dischem, for example, very, very good to bring. And I've said to you before, I think that it's disgusting tasting, but brilliant, because we avoid bitter and sour these days. And bitter is a very, very healthy for the liver, very healthy. We should be bringing in more bitter in very small amounts. Milk thistle is another thing that can support bile. Okay. The reason we've said that it would be useful to check your hormonal panel on a fairly regular basis, or when you feel things have shifted, is to make sure that you're not also, or as well as being too low in estrogen, you're not overly dominant in estrogen, because that in itself can cause gut issues like the fluid retention and bloating, because that then suppresses your natural diuretic progesterone. Okay, so it's just a very much more complicated thing when we have all this estrogen stuff going on and then suddenly it stops. Okay, but there are things that you can bring in to support. And typically we used to eat bitters. It was a very common thing to bring into the diet. It often told us that something was toxic to the body if it was bitter, but we also in that, with that toxicity, it also stimulated liver and digestive processes. So we would always bring a little bit in. Okay, we've just lost that intelligence now.
Okay,
all right. So fermented food. As I've said previously, it was very traditional. I mean, we used to ferment all sorts of things in brine. So salt, water, and we'd store it for months and months, and it would just become more and more potent. And when by potent, it becomes heavy in digestive enzymes, and it becomes heavy in beneficial bacteria. So you're growing little pathogens, beneficial pathogens in your food. Typically, lactofermentation is the process used to ferment foods that we tend to eat, the fermented foods and drinks. So your sugars are converted to lactic acid. Your acid preserves the food by inhibiting the putrefying bacteria. So the bacteria that would naturally overgrow without that acid would then that would make it so disgusting you wouldn't go near it. And you'll always know if a fermented food is off because no one could pay you enough to eat it. It'll smell that disgusting. Okay.
Sorry to interrupt. Do you have a recipe for sauerkraut?
Yes, I do. I can send you one for sauerkraut, for beets, and there was one other. Pickled. I used to do gherkins and make.
I love that.
Take baby cucumbers and make gherkins with them. So I can send you those fermented food recipes.
And then, just quickly, how much? Let's say I make sauerkraut. How much would one add to your diet today? Like a tablespoon, or?
Yeah, I typically do 2 or 3 heaped tablespoons.
Okay.
Yeah. So go wild. You can never have it too much. You're likely to have too little rather than too much.
Tanya, would you say one has to take every day, or
I would have
2
them with
times
most
a week?
meals. No, I would have them with most meals, most cooked meals or processed meals. If you're having salads, I wouldn't worry too much, unless you have gut issues, in which case I would bring them into every meal. You can have them. I've had clients sit with me in sessions in a consult who have been in abdominal pain because they've got major gut stuff going on, and I'll give them a container with sauerkraut in it, and they just sit and eat it while they're in the session, and by the end of the session, they feel much better. So anytime you feel a digestive distress, you can bring sauerkraut or any fermented food in. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So consequences: food lasts a long time and it improves gut health. So there's no downside to it, really. Okay. So we do know that these different microbiomes will be different in lean people versus obese people. So that's quite interesting. You might then obviously want to improve your microbiome quality in order to remain lean and in good health and weight. You'll see I've quoted 2 studies. One showed the ingestion of the acetic acid, which is, along with lactic acid, is a common fermented food acid, leads to fat loss. Okay, because this acetic acid obviously slows down the rate of digestion and absorption of starches, which is what will then allow the body to be a little bit more. It's gonna stop this potential spike, which leads to the fat gain. Okay, which is great. Most common fermented foods. So you've got a list of them there. I mean, there's a ton. I love kombucha personally. I love sauerkraut. I love the milk kefir, but I also like the water kefir. We spoke about that last time. Everything's in there. Even apple cider vinegar is a fermented food, as long as you're buying the cloudy, unfiltered apple cider vinegar. Sourdough bread, because it's made with a yogurt, so it's fermented. So you can see I've suggested it at every meal. Okay, raw versus cooked, because this is also a little bit of a fad a while ago about the raw food movement. So my take on this is that raw food is typically food that hasn't been heated above about 40 degrees Celsius, 40 to 50 degrees Celsius. The problem as I see it with going raw is that most people then take all proteins out. Well, they take animal proteins out, which is not what should happen. It's just a modern day sensitivity, So we should be including animal fleshes, fish, you know, eggs, dairy, whatever. So if you ever decide you want to go raw, make sure you bring in, I mean, whether it's sashimi or it's sushi or it's could be carpaccio or, I remember having the most incredible steak tartare. And I don't know if you girls know that, but it's a raw mince, but it's a fillet mince. So it's the most beautiful quality. No, honestly, Jenny, I thought it's going to be so disgusting. And I went to what was my favorite restaurant in Mayfair here in central London called La Capri. And Stuart, my partner at the time, convinced me to have it. And it was sensational. It was sensational. So, you know, and I love carpaccio, I must say. I love carpaccios and I love sushi. So anyway, you can, you know, expand or not on those things. Raw foods bring a lot of antioxidants and enzymes into the diet. That's what they're useful for. And generally raw food is higher quality because it's uncooked. But again, you're not going to eat everything raw. So your grains, your legumes, your lentils, nuts and seeds, people typically do eat raw, but that really should be soaked and then dehydrated. But that in itself is a very schleppy thing, and you need to buy a dehydrator or something that amounts to that. So I'm not, you know, I wouldn't worry too much about that. But grains, legumes, lentils, you kind of want to, you don't want to eat those raw ever. Okay, because of this difficulty digesting them. Okay, so my understanding, and there seem to be slightly different takes on this, but my understanding of why our brains developed in size is because we developed the, we learned about fire and we learned to cook. And cooking, basically what cooking does to food is it makes it more bioavailable. So in other words, it opens it up, it makes it easier for the body to then absorb the nutrients from it. And so we grew in intelligence because we were able to make our food more bioavailable. And that's what differentiates us from other primates, is that we don't have to graze 24/7. We can eat and we can store. And we eat and we store, and it's all bioavailable. So we're bringing in foods that mean that we don't have to constantly be supplying ourselves with fuel. Okay. So here you can see, to support our brains, we'd have to spend about 9 hours eating every day on an all raw diet. So I don't see the value in going 100% raw. I just don't. I think it's part of our evolution. But I think we need to be mindful of how we cook if we're going to cook. So I think bringing a combination of those two is probably a very good idea. Okay. All right, so we're down to now the diets themselves, traditional versus modern. And this is really just a story about, think about our grandparents who used to eat, if we had grandparents living on a farm, they would eat huge amounts of pig fat and bacon, and they'd make their own bread, and they would just slather the stuff with it, and they'd probably have these beautiful big cheeses, really, really heavy, fatty cheeses. They'd have eggs from their chickens, and they'd eat the chickens, and there was just a multitude of high quality fats and really, really whole foods coming in. Nothing was processed really. Nothing artificial was used. This is all before the 50s. All food groups were eaten, unless you were maybe you were in Iceland. What did you have in Iceland? You would have had here. I actually put in, even the Inuit had a means of fermenting. So when they ferment, because remember I said to you, if you go on a low carb diet, you can utilize proteins as glucose, and so they would actually ferment their protein into carbs. So they actually got their carbs, they got that, but from this fermentation process. It's amazing. There's just, traditionally we just had all the answers, and we would eat everything that was for that season, that was seasonal stuff. And then obviously a lot of what we ate was the animal fats. We had no issue with that because they were just unprocessed, they were beautiful, they were good quality, and that's how we ate. And then in the 60s, along came Ansel Keys, who actually was vegetarian, I think himself, and somehow, it's not what you know, it's kind of who you know. And I think he was very influential with whoever was in at the time. And his ideas basically formed the basis of that food pyramid, that awful, awful food pyramid, which, I think was based on an American, it was American government subsidization program that essentially meant that they were pushing the grains. They were pushing that. So, and we spoke about this last week. They want the base of that pyramid is all carbs, moderate from your proteins and especially your lean proteins, and then a tiny bit of fat, as if fat is a problem for people. So before this, the US population was consuming less than 40% of their calories as carbs, and it went through the roof after that. And no matter the message, the fact that, fat's very bad for you, it causes heart disease, causes cholesterol problems, blah, blah, blah. But we had no lifestyle diseases before we brought this food pyramid in. We were perfectly, perfectly healthy. It was extremely rare to find a lifestyle disease, very rare. But the correlation between those pyramid guidelines and people's general state of health showed very definitely that there was a correlation. Anytime you bring fat down and you take carbs up, you're going to increase diabetes, you're going to increase the risk of heart attack, you're going to increase, obesity. So no matter the fact that everyone brought their fat down and they listened and they went along, but their health got worse. Their health got terribly worse. So, now we sit with a real pandemic on our hands, So I really loved Nina Teicholz, I don't even know how to pronounce it, Teicholz's book, The Big Fat Surprise. Very good, very interesting. Very interesting from a point of view of the history, if you are into that. Jenny, you've disappeared, but I'm assuming you may be talking because your mic is off.
I am here. My son just walked into the room, so he doesn't want to go.
That's fine. That's fine. I just want to check that you're okay. All right. So I don't think we have time for cholesterol. I thought that we might get to that, but that's fine. We'll go through that another time. And what I wanted to get to is what you guys can do from a practical point of view in terms of what we've covered tonight. So just as a means of kind of rounding it all up and looking at your key points, your soaking of grains, lentils, and legumes, just as I say, go back to your notes relating to the macronutrient guidelines that I gave you, because that would be useful to just read through that. I know it's relatively long, but even if you just look at the carb stuff, it'll give you how to deal with those. Chew thoroughly, Elsner, that's your big challenge now. It's your big challenge, as is staying calm and mindful, both of you, while you eat. That's a very big challenge. And it's a challenge for me too when I'm feeling stressed. Don't drink with meals, add fermented food to meals, cook foods, slow and low. Because remember, we spoke last week also, or the week before, or the session before, about how much protein you take out of a food when you cook it on high temperature. So make sure you cook your foods low and slow, low temperature over a slow period. Okay, that's your best bet to keep the value of the protein, the quality of it, and add some raw food to each meal. So I always just think it's a good idea to follow that practice that they do in Europe, where you have a little side salad before you start, or you do stir fry, or you do al dente veg that has still got a bit of firmness to them, or you do a raw soup that you've put into a blender, and it's a little bit of what's the Spanish tomato soup, gazpacho, which is divine. Like a cup's worth of gazpacho before you start. We've got a Spanish restaurant around the corner, and they serve gazpacho in just a little container. It's lovely because there's high nutrient value. You've got olive oil, you've got garlic, you've got tomatoes, peppers, onions, all sorts of things in there. And it's a great way to start a meal. So there are lots of different ways you can bring them in and do what you need to do. So that gives you some ideas in terms of your short list.